I was 21 years old, and the world was a perfect shade of blue. June 12, 1964, in Millfield, Ohio, dawned with a sky so clear it seemed God himself had painted it for my wedding day. Cotton candy clouds drifted lazily above the rolling hills, and the air carried the sweet scent of honeysuckle from the fields beyond our little town. I woke in my childhood bedroom, the same one with creaky floorboards and a window that stuck in the summer heat. My bridesmaids, my sister Judy, and friends Margaret and Dorothy, giggled around me, their voices a soft hum of excitement. My mother's hands trembled as she fastened the tiny pearl buttons down the back of my satin gown, a labor of love she'd sewn over weeks. "You're the most beautiful bride this town's ever seen," she said, her eyes glistening. I believed her, because in that moment, I felt like a princess. The First Baptist Church, where generations of Thompsons had exchanged vows, stood at the heart of Millfield, its white steeple piercing the sky. By 10:30 a.m., our modest home buzzed with neighbors dropping off covered dishes for the backyard reception. Millfield was that kind of place, 3,000 souls who knew your name, your business, and your dreams. A wedding was a community affair, and ours promised to be the event of the season. Richard Miller, my high school sweetheart, was the handsomest boy in Lawrence County, with eyes that crinkled when he smiled and a laugh that made my heart skip. He'd returned from military service with a small diamond ring that had been his grandmother's, and when he proposed under the oak tree by Hooper Creek, I'd said yes before he finished asking. At 11:15, Dad's old Chevrolet, polished to a shine and adorned with white ribbons, waited to carry me to the church. My bridesmaids piled into another car, their pastel blue dresses carefully arranged to avoid wrinkles. Dad and I lingered in the living room, the ticking of the mantel clock loud in the sudden quiet. "You still have time to back out, Ellie," he said, his voice low, eyes fixed somewhere past me. I laughed, thinking it was one of his dry jokes. "Daddy, I love him," I replied, straightening his tie. "I know you do, sweetheart," he said, his jaw tight. "I just want you to be happy." There was a shadow in his gaze I couldn't read, a flicker of something I'd later wish I'd questioned. We arrived at the church at 11:45. I checked the small watch pinned to my bouquet, a gift from Richard, its delicate hands ticking toward noon. The pews were packed, over 200 guests fanning themselves in the June warmth, the air thick with the scent of daisies and polished wood. Through the antechamber's small window, I watched the crowd, their murmurs a soft tide of anticipation. At 11:55, Dorothy's voice cut through the haze, "Has anyone seen Richard?" My stomach lurched, but I dismissed it. He'd been at a bachelor party the night before, organized by his best man, Tommy. They'd probably overslept, I told myself, ignoring the prickle of unease. By 12:10, the church grew restless. Reverend Wilson visited the antechamber, his face unreadable. "Eleanor, dear, it seems the groom is running a bit late." "Nothing to worry about, I'm sure." But his eyes said otherwise. Tommy's wife burst in, pale as ash. "Tommy didn't come home last night," she whispered. My father paced outside, peering down the street for Richard's blue Ford. Mother tried to calm the guests, her excuses about car trouble sounding thinner by the minute. At 12:30, Reverend Wilson suggested delaying the ceremony, his voice gentle but heavy. The whispers in the church grew louder, a chorus of pity and speculation. By 2 p.m., the truth was undeniable. Richard's mother sobbed, insisting something had happened to him. But Mr. Miller returned from Richard's apartment, his face grim. Clothes were missing. Tommy's wife discovered their savings account emptied the day before. I sat frozen in the antechamber, my gown a cruel mockery, the pearl buttons digging into my spine. My bridesmaids hovered, their words a distant hum. All I could think was, how could he do this? What did I do wrong? My father entered, his anger barely contained. "Eleanor, honey, it's time we tell everyone to go home." Something inside me shattered. The future I'd dreamed of, our house by the park, our children, our life, crumbled like dust. Reverend Wilson addressed the congregation, his voice somber. "It appears there will be no wedding today. Please keep Eleanor and both families in your prayers." The pity in the guests' eyes as they filed past was worse than the abandonment. Some offered condolences, as if I'd lost someone to death. Others avoided my gaze entirely. That evening, Sheriff Jenkins confirmed the worst. Richard's car was found at the Columbus bus station. He and Tommy had bought tickets to New York City the night before. There was no crime in leaving a bride at the altar, only the crime against a heart. That night, still in my wedding dress, I cried until my tears ran dry. Mother sat beside me, stroking my hair, but her silence spoke louder than words. "Why, Mama?" I sobbed. "Why would he do this?" She had no answers. None of us did. In the quiet of that broken night, I made a vow: this would not destroy me. I didn't know how, but I would survive. The summer of 1964 draped Millfield in a suffocating haze, the kind that made the air feel like a wet blanket against your skin. The rolling hills beyond town, usually a patchwork of green and gold, shimmered under relentless heat, their beauty mocking my confinement. I hadn't left my parents' house in weeks, not since the church doors closed behind the last pitying guest on what should have been my wedding day. Millfield, with its tidy clapboard homes and single stoplight, had always felt like a warm embrace, but now it was a cage. Every creak of the porch swing, every clink of a spoon in a coffee cup at Millie's diner, carried whispers of my shame. "Poor Eleanor," they'd say, head shaking. "Left at the altar by that Miller boy." I was no longer Ellie Thompson, the girl with dreams as big as the Ohio sky. I was the jilted bride, a cautionary tale. My bedroom, once a sanctuary of pastel wallpaper and shelves lined with Nancy Drew mysteries, became my prison. The wedding dress hung in the closet, its satin folds untouched since I'd finally peeled it off that night, the pearl buttons glinting like accusations. I couldn't bear to look at it, yet I couldn't bear to let it go. Mother tried to coax me out, her voice gentle but firm. "Eleanor, you can't hide forever," she said one August morning, yanking open the curtains. Sunlight flooded the room, harsh and unforgiving. Mrs. Willis called. "The elementary school needs a secretary, and she thought of you." I stared at the ceiling, tracing cracks I'd memorized in sleepless nights. "I'm not ready, Mama." I'd graduated from secretarial school the year before, my fingers nimble on a typewriter, but the thought of sitting at a desk where every parent and teacher could gawk at poor Eleanor was unbearable. She sat on the bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face a mix of love and exasperation. "You'll never be ready if you wait to feel it. Sometimes you do the thing first, and the readiness follows." Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. 2 days later, I sat behind the front desk at Millfield Elementary, a fortress of red brick and chalk dust. The typewriter clacked under my fingers, enrollment forms piling up as I answered the phone with a cheerfulness that felt like a lie. "Good morning, Millfield Elementary, how may I help you?" My voice was steady, but inside, I was crumbling. Parents registering their children did double takes, their eyes flickering with recognition before settling into that awful sympathy. I wanted to scream, "I'm more than this story." But I smiled, nodded, and handed them their paperwork. Mrs. Willis, the principal, was a no-nonsense woman with steel gray hair and a voice that could silence a room. She'd hired me despite, or perhaps because of, my notoriety. "Just look them straight in the eye, Eleanor," she advised after catching a mother whispering to her friend in the hallway. "People forget their curiosity when met with dignity." I tried, but dignity felt like a costume I wasn't ready to wear. The routine saved me, though I didn't see it then. Up at 6:30, breakfast with my parents, Dad silent behind his newspaper, Mother fussing over my plate. Work from 8 to 4 o'clock, then home for dinner, the radio playing softly as Mother knitted and Dad read. Evenings stretched long, filled with books or the flicker of the television, its black and white images a distraction from the ache in my chest. It wasn't living, not really, but it was existing, and that was enough for now. Autumn arrived, painting the hills in fiery reds and golds, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. With it came news that shook the town. Tommy, Richard's best man, had returned. He appeared one rainy evening at his parents' house, thin and haggard, his New York dreams evidently shattered. Judy cornered me after church, her eyes wide. "He's looking for you, Ellie. Says he needs to talk about Richard." My stomach twisted. "I have nothing to say to either of them," I snapped, sharper than I meant. But Tommy was persistent. He waited outside the school one afternoon, his once handsome face gaunt, his coat too big for his frame. "5 minutes, Ellie, please." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet at Drexel's diner, the most public place I could think of. If he'd come to deliver Richard's apologies, I wanted witnesses. The diner smelled of fried onions and coffee, its jukebox playing a mournful Patsy Cline tune. Tommy slid into the booth across from me, stirring his coffee endlessly. "He's not coming back," he said without preamble. "He's married now. Some girl from a wealthy family. Her father got him into Columbia law." The words hit like a slap, though I shouldn't have been surprised. Richard had always landed on his feet. "He's doing well," Tommy continued, oblivious to my silence. "Her family's setting him up at her uncle's firm when he graduates." "And you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Why are you back?" His laugh was hollow. "Turns out I wasn't cut out for the big city. Or maybe it wasn't cut out for me. Ran out of money, couldn't find work. Richard, his new life didn't have room for old friends." I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was exhaustion. "Why tell me this?" I pressed. His eyes met mine, raw and guilty. "Because I'm sorry, Ellie. I'm sorry I helped him. I'm sorry for what we did to you." His voice cracked. "And because Richard wanted me to find out if you'd gotten over him. If you'd moved on." The audacity of it, Richard's curiosity about my recovery from his betrayal, ignited something fierce. I stood, my hands trembling but my voice clear. "You tell Richard that Eleanor Thompson doesn't spend her time thinking about cowards who run away in the night. Tell him I wish him and his new wife every happiness they deserve." I walked out, head high, the diner's chatter fading behind me. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was a spark of defiance, a step toward reclaiming myself. That winter was brutal, the coldest Ohio had seen in decades. Snow piled high against the houses, and the wind howled through the hills, rattling windows and hearts alike. In January 1965, an ice storm left Millfield without power for a week. Pipes froze, schools closed, and neighbors banded together to check on the vulnerable. The elderly couple next door, the Harrises, had no heat, and Mr. Harris's bad heart made the cold dangerous. When he collapsed on our sofa, gray-faced and gasping, I realized help wasn't coming. The roads were impassable, the phone lines dead. I bundled myself in every layer I owned and set out for Dr. Peterson's house 3 blocks away. The journey, normally a 10-minute walk, took nearly an hour. Ice crusted my scarf, and the wind stole my breath, but I pressed on, driven by a purpose I hadn't felt since the wedding. When I finally reached Dr. Peterson and led him back through the storm, he stabilized Mr. Harris. "You've got grit, Eleanor," he said later, his breath fogging in the cold. "Ever consider nursing? The hospital in Athens is starting a training program in the spring." I hadn't considered it, hadn't considered any future beyond surviving each day, but his words planted a seed. Saving Mr. Harris had stirred something in me, a flicker of life amid the numbness. As winter thawed into spring, I enrolled in the nursing program at Athens Memorial Hospital, a 20-mile commute from Millfield. My parents were supportive, if surprised. No Thompson had ever pursued medicine. "I'm proud of you, Ellie," Dad said, his rare words warming me more than the April sun. The program was grueling, learning anatomy, mastering procedures, facing the raw reality of human suffering, but it gave me focus. For the first time since Richard left, I had days where his name didn't cross my mind. I was still broken, but I was moving, and that was enough. Spring of 1965 burst over Millfield like a promise kept, the hills ablaze with dogwood blossoms and the air thick with the earthy scent of thawed soil. The Ohio River, swollen from April rains, churned lazily beyond town, its muddy waters reflecting a sky that finally felt hopeful. I was 22 now, commuting daily to Athens for nursing school, my father's old Chevrolet rattling over the 20-mile stretch of winding roads. Millfield's gossip had dulled to a low hum, the whispers about my abandoned wedding overshadowed by newer scandals, a mayor's affair, a factory layoff scare. I was no longer poor Eleanor in every conversation, but the weight of that June day lingered, a bruise that ached when pressed. Nursing school, though, was a lifeline, pulling me from the shadows of my past into a world of purpose I hadn't known I craved. Athens Memorial Hospital was a hulking brick building, its corridors smelling of antiseptic and hope. The nursing program demanded everything, my mind, my hands, my heart. I memorized the labyrinth of the human body, its fragile systems laid bare in textbooks and cadavers. I learned to suture wounds, administer injections, and chart vitals with a precision that left no room for self-pity. My classmates, mostly women my age, were a mix of wide-eyed dreamers and steely pragmatists. We bonded over late-night study sessions, our laughter a fragile shield against the exhaustion. "You're a natural, Ellie," said Clara, a sharp-tongued girl from Chillicothe, after I calmed a panicked patient during a practical exam. I wanted to believe her, but the girl who'd stood frozen in a wedding dress still whispered doubts in my ear. The work was relentless, but it was also a revelation. Each patient, whether a child with a fever or an elderly man facing his final days, taught me something about resilience. I saw bodies broken and mended, families torn apart and rebuilt. For the first time, I understood that pain wasn't just something to endure, it could be a teacher, too. My instructors noticed my knack for comforting the frightened, for sitting with the dying when no one else could. "You've got a gift, Miss Thompson," said Miss Hargrove, our head instructor, her stern face softening. "You see the person, not just the illness." Her words lit something inside me, a spark of pride I hadn't felt since before Richard. Back in Millfield, life settled into a new rhythm. I'd leave home at dawn, the hills cloaked in mist, and return after dusk, the stars sharp against the velvet sky. Mother worried about the long hours, her hands twisting her apron as she packed my lunches. "You're wearing yourself thin, Ellie," she'd say, her voice threaded with fear that I was running from something. Maybe I was. Dad, quieter than ever since the wedding, would just nod as I kissed his cheek goodbye, but I caught the flicker of relief in his eyes. I was moving forward, and that was enough for him. By 1967, I'd completed my training and landed a position at Athens Memorial, in the maternity ward. The irony wasn't lost on me, the abandoned bride now ushering new life into the world. But there was healing in it, a quiet redemption in holding a squalling newborn, its tiny chest heaving with the miracle of breath. The ward was a whirlwind of joy and sorrow, mothers beaming as they cradled their babies, others weeping over empty arms. I learned to navigate both, offering a hand to squeeze or a shoulder to cry on. Each birth chipped away at the hardness in my heart, each cry a reminder that life persisted, no matter how deep the wounds. Millfield itself was changing, caught in the undertow of a world in upheaval. The evening news brought grainy images of Vietnam, of protests and assassinations, a cultural earthquake that felt distant yet undeniable. Even our small corner of Ohio wasn't immune. Young men from Lawrence County shipped out, some never returning, their names etched on a memorial by the courthouse. The hospital began receiving its first Vietnam casualties in late 1968, boys barely older than I'd been on my wedding day, their bodies broken, their eyes haunted. I volunteered for extra shifts on the veterans' ward, drawn to their pain in a way I couldn't explain. Maybe it was because I knew what it was to lose a future you'd counted on, to wake up in a world that didn't make sense. One evening, as I adjusted a young soldier's he grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "You ever lose something you thought was yours forever?" he asked, his voice raw. I froze, the question cutting too close. "Yes," I said simply, meeting his gaze. "But you keep going. You find new things to hold on to." He nodded, as if my answer was enough, and I realized it was enough for me, too. Those moments, raw and unguarded, became my anchor. Dr. James Matthews, a decade older and quietly brilliant, became a friend during those long nights. Divorced, with a dedication to medicine that bordered on obsession, he was a steady presence in the chaos of the ward. We shared coffee during breaks, sometimes a meal after a grueling shift. He never pushed for more, respecting the walls I'd built around myself. "You ever think about what's next, Eleanor?" he asked one night, as we watched a thunderstorm lash the hospital windows. "After the hurt fades?" I considered it, the rain blurring the world beyond. "I think this is what's next," I said, gesturing to the ward. "This work, these patients. It's more than I thought I'd have 4 years ago." He smiled, a rare softness in his eyes, and let the moment pass. That spring of 1969 brought tragedy to Millfield. A school bus, carrying children home from a field trip, skidded into Hooper Creek during a flash flood. The hospital mobilized, ambulances screaming through the rain-soaked streets. I worked 36 hours straight, moving from patient to patient in a fog of adrenaline and grief. Among the injured was Sarah Collins, a 10-year-old with dark hair and eyes that held too much sorrow. She'd lost both parents the year before, raised by an elderly grandmother who suffered a fatal heart attack upon hearing of the crash. Sarah's leg was broken, her body bruised, but it was her silence that pierced me, a quiet that spoke of a heart already fractured. I started spending my breaks with her, reading Charlotte's Web or combing her tangled hair. One night, she asked, her voice small, "What's gonna happen to me now?" I had no answer. The social worker, a kind but overworked woman, said the state would find a foster home, but Sarah's injuries and age made it complicated. The thought of this child, already so wounded, being shuffled through a system that might not see her sparked something fierce in me. Without thinking, I heard myself say, "What if I took her? Just until she's recovered?" The idea was reckless, a single woman, barely 26, with a demanding job and a past that still haunted her. My mother was horrified when I told her. "You've never even had a child, Eleanor. And your apartment's hardly suitable." But I was resolute. "I'll move," I said, the certainty in my voice surprising even me. The process was daunting: home visits, background checks, questions about my emotional stability. "You've experienced significant trauma, Miss Thompson," the social worker noted, her pen poised over her clipboard. "Are you equipped to raise a traumatized child?" I looked her in the eye. "I'm equipped because I understand trauma. And because I know life continues afterward." By autumn, I'd relocated to a small rental house near the elementary school, its porch creaking under the weight of new beginnings. Sarah was officially in my temporary care, her crutches clicking softly as she navigated our new home. Her nightmares woke us both, her screams echoing the loss she couldn't yet name. But slowly, we built a routine: breakfasts of oatmeal and apples, evenings with spelling homework by the kitchen table. "How long will I stay with you?" she asked one night, her pencil paused over a worksheet. "As long as you need to," I said, careful not to promise more than I could deliver. But in my heart, I was already hers, and she was mine. The autumn of 1969 settled over Millfield like a soft quilt, the Ohio hills cloaked in amber and crimson, the air sharp with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. My new rental house, a modest 2-bedroom with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch, sat just blocks from Millfield Elementary. Its windows rattled in the October wind, and the kitchen linoleum curled at the edges, but it was ours, mine and Sarah's. At 10, Sarah Collins was a wisp of a girl, her dark hair perpetually tangled, her eyes carrying a wariness that no child should know. Her leg was healing, the cast replaced by a brace, but the deeper wounds, of losing her parents, her grandmother, her sense of safety, were slower to mend. I was 26, a nurse with a heart still scarred from Richard's betrayal, yet I'd taken on this fragile child, driven by an instinct I couldn't name. Our days found a tentative rhythm. I'd wake at dawn, the hills shrouded in mist, and fix breakfast, oatmeal with sliced apples, Sarah's favorite. She'd eat slowly, her gaze fixed on the table, as if expecting the meal to vanish. I'd drop her at school before driving to Athens Memorial, where the maternity ward kept me tethered to life's beginnings. Evenings, we'd tackle homework at the kitchen table, the radio playing low, its tinny melodies filling the silence. Sarah's nightmares woke us both some nights, her cries piercing the dark. I'd sit on her bed, stroking her hair, whispering, "You're safe now," until her breathing steadied. I wasn't sure she believed me, but I said it anyway, for both our sakes. The adoption process was a gauntlet. As a single woman in small-town Ohio, I was an anomaly, my fitness as a guardian questioned at every turn. Social workers visited weekly, their clipboards bristling with doubts. "Miss Thompson, your apartment was barely suitable for one said, eyeing my new home's cracked plaster. And your work hours are demanding. How will you manage a child with such needs?" I squared my shoulders. "I've managed worse," I said, thinking of the church antechamber, the weight of 200 pitying stares. "Sarah needs stability, and I'm giving her that." My resolve surprised even me, a fierceness born from the ashes of my own broken dreams. Millfield watched us with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. At the grocery store, neighbors offered cautious smiles, their eyes flickering to Sarah's brace. "You're doing a good thing, Ellie," Mrs. Carter said, her voice heavy with unspoken buts. Others were less kind. "A spinster raising a cripple?" I overheard at the post office, the words slicing like a blade. I gripped Sarah's hand tighter, her small fingers anchoring me. "Don't listen," I whispered, but her flinch told me she'd heard. That night, I baked her favorite molasses cookies, the kitchen warm with cinnamon, and we ate them on the porch, watching fireflies blink in the dusk. "You're not what they say," I told her. "You're Sarah, and that's enough." She nodded, but her eyes stayed distant. My parents were a lifeline, though they struggled with my choice. Mother fussed over Sarah, knitting her scarves and baking pies, but her worry was palpable. "You're so young, Ellie," she said one Sunday, her hands twisting a dish towel. "This is a lifetime commitment." Dad, quieter since the wedding, just watched Sarah color at the dining table, his expression unreadable. Later, he pulled me aside. "You're doing right by her," he said, his voice gruff. "Takes guts." From him, it was high praise, and I clung to it through the long nights of doubt. At the hospital, my work in the maternity ward grounded me. The chaos of births, joyful, heartbreaking, miraculous, reminded me that life was bigger than my pain. I'd hold a newborn, its warmth against my chest, and feel a pang for the children Richard and I had planned, names we'd whispered under the stars. But Sarah was my reality now, her presence filling spaces I hadn't known were empty. Dr. James Matthews, my steady friend, noticed the change. "You're different, Eleanor," he said over coffee in the hospital cafeteria, his eyes kind. "Lighter, somehow." I smiled, stirring my cup. "Sarah's teaching me things I didn't know I needed to learn." The world beyond Millfield grew louder, its upheaval seeping into our quiet corner. Vietnam raged on, the draft-snatching boys I'd known in high school. Protests flared on college campuses, their images flickering on our small TV. Sarah, too young to grasp the scope, asked about the soldiers I cared for on the veterans' ward, their bandages and haunted stares. "Why do they look so sad?" she said one evening, her voice small. I hesitated, choosing my words. "They've seen things that hurt their hearts," I said. "But we're helping them heal." She nodded, her fingers tracing the brace on her leg, and I wondered how much of her own heart she was guarding. By spring 1970, Sarah's physical recovery was steady, but her emotional scars ran deep. She'd flinch at loud noises, shy away from other children. I enrolled her in art classes at the community center, hoping creativity might unlock what words couldn't. She'd come home with drawings, dark, swirling skies over tiny houses, a lone figure standing apart. "That's me," she'd say, pointing to the figure, her voice matter of fact. My heart ached, but I praised her work, hanging each piece on the fridge. Slowly, she began to trust our life together, her smiles rare but precious, like sunlight breaking through clouds. The adoption hearings dragged on, a maze of paperwork and scrutiny. My trauma, Richard's abandonment, was a constant point of contention. "How can you provide emotional stability when you've endured such a public betrayal?" a judge asked, his tone clinical. I swallowed the urge to snap and answered calmly. "That betrayal taught me how to rebuild, Your Honor. I've turned pain into purpose, and I'll do the same for Sarah." My voice shook, but my conviction didn't. The judge's expression softened, and I saw a glimmer of respect. In May 1971, the adoption was finalized. Sarah Collins became Sarah Watson, my daughter-in-law and heart. The courtroom was packed, my parents, hospital colleagues, even Mrs. Willis from the elementary school, her stern face beaming. Sarah, in a new yellow dress, clung to my hand, her eyes wide but hopeful. "You're mine now," I whispered as we left the courthouse, the spring air warm with possibility. She smiled, a real one, and said, "Forever?" I nodded, tears blurring my vision. Forever. That night, we celebrated at home with a cake I'd baked, its icing uneven but sweet. James stopped by, his gift a small wooden music box that played "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." Sarah wounded again and again, her laughter filling the house. "Well done, Eleanor," James said softly, his eyes on mine. "You've created something beautiful from pain." I looked at Sarah, twirling to the music, and felt a truth settle in my bones. This was my redemption, not from Richard, but from the idea that my life had ended that June day. It hadn't. It had only begun. The years that followed were a tapestry of small victories and quiet struggles. Sarah grew, her brace discarded, her nightmares less frequent. I rose to head nurse in the maternity ward, my days a blur of deliveries and paperwork, my nights filled with Sarah's school plays and science projects. Millfield embraced us, the whispers fading into acceptance. Sarah's mom, they'd call me at the PTA, a title I wore with pride. The past still lingered, letters from Richard's cousin in New York, hints of his new life, but I tucked them away, focusing on the life I was building. Sarah was my miracle, and together, we were enough. The spring of 1972 bloomed over Millfield with a gentleness that felt like forgiveness, the Ohio hills carpeted in wildflowers, the air alive with the buzz of bees and the distant hum of tractors. My life had settled into a rhythm that, if not exhilarating, was deeply satisfying. At 29, I was head nurse of the maternity ward at Athens Memorial, my days filled with the miracle of new life and the quiet pride of guiding my team. Sarah, now 13, was thriving, her dark hair often tied back with a ribbon, her laughter a melody that filled our small rental house. The brace was gone, replaced by a slight limp she barely noticed, and her art, vivid landscapes and bold self-portraits, covered our walls, a testament to her growing confidence. Millfield had become our haven, its clapboard homes and winding streets no longer a cage but a community that called us their own. Yet the past was never far. I'd catch it in the scent of daisies, in the chime of the church bell at noon, in the occasional letter from Richard's cousin in Queens, updating me on his glittering New York life. I burned those letters in the kitchen sink, watching the flames consume words I didn't want to read. Sarah was my focus, her school projects and budding friendships my anchor. But the world beyond Millfield was shifting, its turbulence creeping into our quiet corner. The Vietnam War dragged on, its casualties filling our hospital wards, their broken bodies a stark reminder of life's fragility. Watergate dominated the news, eroding trust in the institutions we'd once held sacred. Even in Millfield, change was palpable, young people leaving for cities, the textile mill struggling, the air thick with uncertainty. One April evening, as I sat grading Sarah's history essay, the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the soft crackle of the radio. It was Judy, my sister, her voice tight. "Ellie, Richard's back in town. Staying at the Millfield Inn. I thought you should know." My pen froze, ink blotting the paper. 15 years had passed since he'd left me at the altar, yet his name still carried a jolt, like touching a live wire. "Why is he here?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "No one knows," Judy said. "But he's been asking about you." I thanked her and hung up, my heart pounding. Sarah looked up from her sketchpad, sensing the shift. "Everything okay, Mom?" I forced a smile. "Just fine, sweetheart. Finish your drawing." Sleep eluded me that night, the past clawing its way to the surface. I saw Richard's face, his crinkled eyes, his easy grin, morphed into the stranger who'd vanished without a word. What could he want after all this time? By morning, I'd resolved to avoid him, to protect the life I'd built. But Millfield was small, its streets a web that inevitably crossed. That afternoon, returning from a shift at the hospital, I found him on my porch steps, older now, silver threading his dark hair, his expensive suit soaked from an April downpour. "Hello, Eleanor," he said, rising slowly, his voice deeper, polished with a New York edge. Shock rooted me to the spot, rain dripping from my umbrella. "You're trespassing," I said flatly, brushing past him to unlock the door. I stepped inside but left it open, an invitation I didn't want to offer but couldn't withhold. He followed, his eyes scanning the living room, Sarah's textbooks, my nursing journals, the framed photos of her from infancy to now. "Your daughter?" he asked, gesturing to a Christmas picture of us laughing by the tree. "Yes," I said, offering nothing more. He hadn't earned her story. In the kitchen, I filled the percolator, the familiar ritual steadying my shaking hands. "You look well," he said, awkward in my modest home. I laughed, sharp and humorless. "What are you doing here, Richard? Surely you didn't come all this way to comment on my appearance." He cradled the coffee I handed him, not drinking, his face etched with exhaustion. "My wife died," he said abruptly. "Cancer. 3 months ago." I murmured condolences, the words automatic from years of comforting grieving families. "We had a good marriage," he continued. 15 years, no children. She was kind, better than I deserved. He paused, meeting my eyes. "She made me promise to make things right with you." I stiffened. "There's nothing to make right. What's done is done. We've built different lives." His voice dropped, almost a whisper. "That's not entirely true, Eleanor. I haven't been honest about why I left." Part of me wanted to stop him, to preserve the narrative I'd clung to, that he was a coward seduced by New York's promise. But the nurse in me, trained to face hard truths, needed to hear it. He reached for a worn manila envelope from his briefcase. 2 days before our wedding, I received this. Delivered by a man who worked for Jonathan Pearson. The name hit like a blow. Pearson, Millfield's wealthiest man, had owned the textile mill where my father worked, his influence a shadow over the town. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside were grainy photos of a young woman with an older man, her face unmistakably my mother's. Financial records followed, alleging my father had embezzled from the mill for years. "This is a lie," I whispered, shoving the envelope away. Richard shook his head. "I thought so, too." I confronted Pearson. He showed me more, dates, bank accounts, your parents' signatures. He said if I married you, he'd make it public. Your father would go to prison, your mother's shame exposed. My mind reeled. My father, who'd never take a penny that wasn't his. My mother, who blushed at a waltz. Why? I managed. "Because I wouldn't sell him my grandfather's land," Richard said, his jaw tight. He wanted it for the mill. I was the obstacle. The pieces clicked, my father's sudden retirement, my mother's withdrawal from church, their move to Arizona. "You could have told me," I said, anger rising. "We could have faced it together." He looked away. "Pearson said if I warned you, he'd release everything immediately. I had 2 days to decide." His voice cracked. "I thought I was protecting you." Silence fell, heavy with the weight of choices made in desperation. "Why now?" I asked. "Pearson's dead," he said. 6 weeks ago. And my wife, she said no one should live believing they weren't enough when the truth was something else. I stood, needing air, distance. My world had tilted, the past I'd understood revealed as a lie. "Get out," I whispered, then louder, "Get out." He gathered his briefcase, leaving the envelope. "I'm at the Millfield Inn for a week," he said at the door. "If you want to talk." When he left, I collapsed onto the sofa, the photos staring back like ghosts. Sarah's voice broke the haze, home from school. "Mom, why's a man crying in his car outside?" I wiped my eyes, forcing a smile. "It's a long story, sweetheart." That night, after Sarah slept, I sat with the envelope, its contents a Pandora's box. My parents, flawed but innocent, victims of Pearson's malice. Richard, not a coward but a young man cornered by fear. And me, shaped by a betrayal that wasn't what it seemed. I thought of Sarah, my anchor, and the life we'd built. Whatever truth Richard brought, it couldn't undo her. I needed time to process, to reconcile the woman I'd become with the girl I'd been. Tomorrow, I'd decide what came next. The night Richard left my porch, Millfield slept under a starless sky, the April rain a steady drum against my windows. I sat at the kitchen table, the manila envelope before me, its contents spilling like poison across the worn wood. Grainy photos of a woman staged to look like my mother, forged documents accusing my father of theft, lies crafted by Jonathan Pearson to shatter my future. My hand shook as I traced the edges of a photograph, the betrayal not just Richard's but a deeper wound, my parents, innocent yet tainted by this cruel fabrication. The life I'd built, nurse, mother to Sarah, pillar of Millfield, felt unsteady, its foundation cracked by truths I hadn't asked for. Sarah slept upstairs, her soft breathing a reminder of what mattered most, but even her presence couldn't quiet the storm in my mind. I barely slept, the clocks tick a relentless march toward dawn. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving Millfield draped in a silvery mist, the hills looming like silent witnesses. Sarah sensed my unrest, her eyes searching mine over breakfast. "You're quiet, Mom," she said, pushing her oatmeal aside. "Just tired, sweetheart," I lied, forcing a smile. After dropping her at school, I called the hospital, requesting my first ever personal day. "Everything all right, Eleanor?" James asked when I phoned, his concern cutting through the line. "It's complicated," I admitted. "Richard's back." He had reasons for leaving. James offered to come over, but I declined. "I need to sort this alone." I drove to the First Baptist Church, its white steeple stark against the gray sky. The sanctuary was empty, morning light filtering through stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned patterns across the pews. I sat in the back, the same pews where 200 guests had waited for a wedding that never happened. The memory of that June day, my gown's weight, the murmur swelling like a tide, pressed against me. I closed my eyes, trying to reconcile the pain of that moment with Richard's revelation. He hadn't run from me but from Pearson's threats, believing he was saving my family. The truth was a jagged pill, my abandonment was real, its impact undeniable, yet its cause was a lie. Reverend Carter, the young pastor who'd replaced Reverend Wilson, found me there. "Nurse Watson, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. I hesitated, then shared the broad strokes, Richard's return, the blackmail, the forged evidence. "I'm wrestling with forgiveness, Reverend," I said. "The complicated kind." He sat beside me, his youth belying his wisdom. "Forgiveness isn't for them," he said. "It's a gift you give yourself, a way to lay down a burden you shouldn't carry." His words echoed as I left, the hills now glowing under a breaking sun, their curves soft as a mother's embrace. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the Millfield Inn, its faded burgundy carpet and musty air unchanged since my childhood. Richard was in the tea room, looking as sleepless as I felt, his suit rumpled. "I didn't expect you so soon," he said, rising. I sat across from him, a pot of Earl Grey growing cold between us. "I burned the envelope last night," I said, my voice steady. "All of it." Alarm flashed across his face. "But the proof," I cut him off. "I've lived with one truth for 15 years. I don't need paper to hold another." I leaned forward. "I want to understand. Everything. From the beginning." For 2 hours, as the tea room filled with the lunch crowd, Richard unraveled his story. The messenger's arrival 2 days before our wedding, the photos and documents, Pearson's threats, not just against my parents but me. "He said he'd ruin your nursing prospects," Richard said, his voice hollow. "No hospital would hire you, no school would take you." He'd confronted Pearson, only to be shown more evidence, meticulously fabricated. I was 23, Eleanor. Terrified. "I thought leaving was noble, sparing you scandal." His laugh was bitter. "I've had 15 years to see it was cowardice, too." He spoke of New York, law school funded by his wife Judith's family, a career at her uncle's firm, a drinking problem that shadowed his 30s. Judith, kind and perceptive, had known he carried a wound. 5 years into our marriage, I told her about you, he said, his voice softening. She pushed me to heal, to face what I'd done. When she got sick, she made me promise to tell you the truth. I studied him, the boy I'd loved, now a man shaped by regret, his wealth and success hollow against the sadness in his eyes. Tell me about your daughter, he said, shifting focus. I smiled, the tension easing. Sarah's my miracle. She came to me after a bus accident, no family left. Adopting her was the best thing I've ever done. His eyes warmed. I always knew you'd be a wonderful mother. The words stirred unexpected tears, memories of our youthful dreams, 4 children, names chosen under starlit skies. And you? I asked. No children? A shadow crossed his face. Judith couldn't, after a surgery. We considered adoption, but my career, then her health. His voice trailed off, heavy with roads not taken. What do you want from me, Richard? I asked, the question sharp in the quiet. He looked startled. Nothing, Eleanor. I came to give you the truth, not take more. He hesitated. But I stayed, hoping, maybe for peace, for both of us. I walked home, the spring air wrapping me like a shawl, his words turning in my mind. Could I forgive him? Should I? The question lingered through dinner with Sarah, through the evening's routine, through another sleepless night. The next morning, I took Sarah to the Millfield Community Center, its halls lined with photos of programs I'd helped build, the free clinic, the youth support group Sarah had started. This is what grew from that broken wedding, I told her, stopping at a 1972 photo of me cutting the clinic's ribbon. The pain shaped me, but so did the choices I made after. She listened, her eyes thoughtful, and I realized I was speaking to myself, too. Back home, I gathered the remaining documents from Richard's envelope, proof of Pearson's lies, and carried them to the fireplace. One by one, I fed them to the flames, watching the paper curl and blacken. The lies that had stolen 15 years dissolved into ash, and with them, a weight I hadn't known I carried. I called James that evening, needing his steady presence. I'm letting it go, I said, the fire's embers glowing behind me. Not for Richard, but for me. He was quiet, then. You're stronger than anyone I know, Eleanor. His words settled like a bomb. The past couldn't be undone, but it could be reframed. Tomorrow, I'd return to the Millfield Inn, not to forgive Richard, not yet, but to understand more, to see if the boy I'd loved still lived in the man he'd become. And maybe, in that understanding, I'd find the peace he sought, and the closure I deserved. The May sun rose over Millfield with a clarity that felt like a new beginning, bathing the Ohio hills in golden light, the air sweet with lilac and fresh-cut grass. My rental house, with its creaky porch and blooming garden, hummed with the quiet rhythm of our life, Sarah's laughter, the clink of breakfast dishes, the soft drone of the radio. At 29, I was no longer the girl who'd waited in a wedding dress, nor the woman who'd burned Richard's lies in a fit of reckoning. I was Eleanor Watson, mother, nurse, and now, someone standing at a crossroads, deciding what to do with the truth Richard had brought back into my life. Sarah, now 13, sensed the shift, her perceptive eyes watching me over her sketchpad. You're thinking about that man, aren't you? She said one morning, her tone more curious than accusing. I nodded, stirring my coffee. I'm thinking about a lot of things, sweetheart. Richard's return had unraveled the narrative I'd clung to for 15 years, replacing betrayal with a more complex truth. He'd left to protect me, manipulated by Jonathan Pearson's lies. The revelation didn't erase the pain, it couldn't, but it softened its edges, like a river smoothing a jagged stone. I'd burned the forged documents, not to deny the truth but to free myself from its weight. Now, I needed to understand the man Richard had become, and whether the past could be woven into the fabric of my present without tearing it apart. I returned to the Millfield in that afternoon, the lobby's musty air and faded carpet a time capsule of small-town permanence. Richard was waiting in the tea room, his face less haggard, though shadows lingered under his eyes. I didn't think you'd come back, he said, a cautious hope in his voice. I sat, the table between us a buffer. I'm here to listen, I said. Not to forgive, not yet, but to know who you are now. He nodded, accepting the boundary, and we talked, the conversation stretching into the afternoon, the tea room's chatter fading to a hum. He told me of his life after New York, Judith's unwavering kindness, the career that brought wealth but not peace, the therapy that helped him name the trauma of his coerced choice. I carried you with me, Eleanor, he said, his voice low. Not just guilt, but the memory of who I was with you. Losing that, it broke something in me. I listened, my heart torn between empathy and the lingering ache of his absence. And Judith? I asked. She sounds like she saved you. He smiled, a flicker of warmth. She did. She saw the cracks and loved me anyway. Her dying wish was for me to find peace, starting with you. I shared my own story, haltingly at first, Sarah's adoption, the nursing career that gave me purpose, the community I'd helped build. The pain didn't just hurt me, I said. It pushed me to create something better. His eyes held mine, a quiet awe in them. You turned it into light, Eleanor. I always knew you were strong, but this, he shook his head, words failing. The moment felt fragile, a bridge forming between the people we'd been and the ones we were now. That evening, I took Richard to the Millfield Community Center, its halls a gallery of my life's work. I showed him the 1972 photo of me opening the free clinic, the newspaper clippings of Sarah's youth support group, the programs that had grown from my resolve. This is what came from our broken wedding, I said, my voice steady. Not just survival, but something that touched others. He studied the photos, his expression unreadable. You're saying good came from what I did, he asked finally. I shook my head. I'm saying life is bigger than villains and victims. Pearson was wrong, you were human, and I chose what to do with the pieces. We walked to the park across the street, sitting on a bench under a flowering dogwood, children's laughter drifting from a nearby playground. I've spent 15 years waiting for absolution, Richard said, his voice raw. From you, from myself, from Judith. But seeing this, what you've built, I realize you didn't need me to come back. You healed without me. I considered his words, the spring breeze cool against my skin. Not completely, I admitted. There was always a part of me that wondered what was wrong with me, why you could leave without a word. That wound never closed. He reached for my hand, then stopped, respecting the distance I'd set. There was nothing wrong with you, Eleanor. Nothing. Pearson knew I'd do anything to protect you, that's why his threat worked. His voice broke, and I saw the boy I'd loved, still there beneath the years. We talked until dusk, about regrets, joys, the lives we'd lived apart. He spoke of Judith's laughter, I of Sarah's first school play. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was understanding, a step toward peace. At home, Sarah waited, her homework spread across the kitchen table. You saw him again, she said, not looking up. I nodded, sitting beside her. He's not the man I thought he was. And I'm not the girl he left. She set down her pencil, her eyes searching. Are you forgiving him? I hesitated, the weight of her question settling. I think I'm starting to. Not for him, but for me. Carrying that pain, it's heavy, Sarah. She squeezed my hand, her touch grounding me. You're the strongest person I know, Mom. The next weeks were a careful dance. Richard stayed in Millfield, his presence stirring whispers but also curiosity. I kept our meetings public, coffee at Drexel's diner, walks in the park, aware of the town's watchful eyes. We spoke of practical things, his plans to stay, the land he still owned, Pearson's death leaving it untouched. One day, he mentioned a vague idea, a retreat center on his grandfather's land, for veterans or youth. It could be a place of healing, he said, his voice tentative. The idea sparked something in me, a vision of purpose born from our shared pain. You'd need help, I said, half smiling. Millfield's politics are tricky. He grinned, a flash of the boy I'd known. Would you? I didn't answer, not then. But the seed was planted. At the hospital, James noticed my lighter mood. "You're finding your way through this, aren't you?" he said over lunch, his eyes kind but searching. I nodded. "I'm learning what forgiveness feels like. Not erasing the past, but making room for something new." He smiled, no trace of jealousy, only the quiet support that had always defined him. "You deserve that, Eleanor." By June, Millfield buzzed with summer, kids on bikes, the river glinting under long days. Richard and I met weekly, our conversations deepening, trust rebuilding like a house on old foundations. Sarah watched, her silence thoughtful. "He makes you smile," she said one night, catching me humming as I washed dishes. I laughed, surprised. "He does, sometimes." She tilted her head. "Maybe it's okay to let someone in, Mom. Not just him, but someone." Her words lingered, a challenge to the walls I'd built around my heart. The past wasn't gone, it never would be, but it was no longer my prison. Richard's truth had given me a choice, to cling to pain or to let it transform. I wasn't ready to fully forgive, not yet, but I was ready to try, to see what could grow from the ashes of that long ago June day. Millfield, with its hills and heart, would be my witness. The summer of 1972 draped Millfield in a golden haze, the Ohio hills shimmering under long, lazy days, the air thick with the scent of sun-warmed hay and river mud. My life, once a jagged puzzle of survival, had settled into a pattern of purpose. Mornings with Sarah, now 13, her sketches piling up on the kitchen table, days at Athens Memorial, guiding the maternity ward with a steady hand, evenings on our porch, the creak of the swing a lullaby. At 29, I was no longer defined by the girl left at the altar, but by the woman who'd built a family, a career, a community. Richard's return had stirred the past, but it hadn't broken me. Instead, it offered a chance to reframe my story, to decide what forgiveness might mean, not just for him, but for myself. Richard stayed in Millfield, his presence no longer a shock but a quiet reality. The town's whispers softened, curiosity replacing judgment as word spread of his coerced departure. Pearson's name, still a bitter taste in Millfield's mouth, fueled the shift. Richard wasn't the villain, but a young man cornered by a powerful man's greed. We met regularly, our conversations a careful bridge between past and present. Coffee at Drexel's Diner, walks along Hooper Creek, discussions about his retreat center idea, a place for healing on his grandfather's land. "It could help people like those veterans you work with," he said one August afternoon, the river glinting behind him. "Or kids like Sarah was, carrying too much." I nodded, the vision taking root. "It's a good idea," I said. "But it'll take more than money." Millfield's stubborn about change. "Would you help?" he asked, his eyes searching. I didn't answer, not yet, but the possibility hummed in me, a spark of purpose tied to our shared history. Sarah noticed the change, her perceptive gaze catching my lighter steps. "You're different since he came back," she said one evening, her pencil pausing over a drawing of the hills. "Happier, maybe." I smiled, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. "Maybe I'm just figuring out how to let go of old hurts." She tilted her head, thoughtful. "Does that mean you love him again?" The question startled me, its simplicity cutting deep. "No," I said firmly. "Not like before. But maybe we could be friends, partners in something good." She nodded, satisfied, but her words lingered, stirring questions I wasn't ready to face. At the hospital, my work remained my anchor. The maternity ward was a whirlwind, babies born, mothers weeping with joy or grief, life asserting itself in every cry. I trained new nurses, my calm under pressure earning their respect. James, ever my friend, watched my evolving dynamic with Richard with quiet support. "You're building something new, Eleanor," he said over lunch, his fork pausing mid-bite. "Not just with him, but with yourself." I stirred my tea, considering. I used to think healing meant forgetting the pain. Now I think it's about making it mean something. He smiled, his eyes warm. "That's wisdom most people never find." Millfield itself was changing, the world's unrest seeping into our small corner. The textile mill laid off workers, leaving families scrambling. Vietnam's shadow grew longer, the courthouse memorial etching new names. I volunteered more hours on the veterans' ward, their stories of loss and survival mirroring my own. One soldier, barely 20, gripped my hand as I changed his bandages. "You ever think life's just one big trick?" he asked, his voice hollow. I met his gaze. "Sometimes. But then you find people worth fighting for, and it's not a trick anymore." He nodded, and I felt the truth of it in my bones. Sarah, my colleagues, even Richard, in his complicated way, were my fight. By autumn, Richard and I began sketching plans for the retreat center. We met at the community center, spreading maps and notes across a table, the hum of after-school programs in the background. "It could have cabins here," I said, pointing to a wooded section of his land. "And a main hall for therapy, workshops." He leaned in, his enthusiasm infectious. "Maybe a garden, too." Judith loved gardens, she said they heal. I glanced at him, struck by the tenderness in his voice. "She sounds like she was your anchor." He nodded, his eyes distant. "She was. Like Sarah is for you." The work was grounding, a tangible way to channel the past into something meaningful. Millfield's leaders were skeptical, zoning laws, funding, the town's resistance to outsiders, but my reputation as Nurse Watson opened doors. "You're vouching for him?" the mayor asked, eyebrows raised. "I'm vouching for the idea," I clarified. "This town needs healing as much as anyone." Slowly, support grew, fueled by the free clinic's success and Sarah's youth group, both tied to my name. Sarah, now navigating the turbulence of adolescence, was my compass. She'd started high school, her confidence growing alongside her sharp wit. One night, as we baked cookies, she asked, "What if this retreat thing makes you love him again?" I paused, flour dusting my hands. "Love's not that simple, Sarah. What I feel for him now, it's respect, maybe friendship. The love we had, that's gone." She studied me, then nodded. "Just don't forget you're enough without him." Her words, wise beyond her years, steadied me. "I won't," I promised. Winter descended, blanketing Millfield in snow, the hills stark and silent. Richard and I continued planning, our meetings spilling into dinners, conversations stretching late. We were careful, aware of the town's eyes, but something was shifting, a trust rebuilt, not on youthful passion but on shared purpose. James, ever perceptive, teased gently one night at the hospital. "You're glowing, Eleanor. Careful, or I'll think you're falling for him." I laughed, swatting his arm. "It's not like that. It's possibility." He raised an eyebrow but let it go, his friendship a constant I cherished. Christmas Eve brought a small gathering at my house, Sarah, James, a few nurses, and, at Sarah's insistence, Richard. The dining room glowed with candlelight, the air rich with roast turkey and laughter. Richard fit easily, his stories of New York charming the group, but it was his quiet moments, helping Sarah clear plates, thanking me for including him, that struck me. As guests left, he lingered, producing a small velvet box. "An early Christmas gift," he said, his voice soft. Inside was a silver locket, one side engraved with the community center, the other with words, "From endings come beginnings." "It's beautiful," I whispered, touched by its thoughtfulness. He smiled, a hint of the boy I'd known. "I hoped you'd think so." Later, alone by the fire, I turned the locket in my hands, Sarah's words echoing, "You're enough without him." I was, but the locket symbolized something more, a chance to build, not just a retreat center, but a new chapter, one where pain and possibility coexisted. Richard wasn't my future, not in the way he'd once been, but he could be part of it, a partner in healing, a friend who understood the cost of our shared past. Outside, snow fell, blanketing Millfield in quiet hope, and I felt ready to see where this path led, not with fear, but with the strength I'd earned. The winter of 1973 wrapped Millfield in a cocoon of frost, the Ohio hills glistening under a brittle January sun, the air sharp with the tang of pine and chimney smoke. My life, at 30, was a tapestry of hard-won joys. Sarah, now 14, navigating high school with a fierce spirit, my role as head nurse at Athens Memorial, a beacon of purpose, and the retreat center project with Richard, a bridge between our fractured past and a hopeful future. The rental house, its porch now strung with icicle lights, hummed with the warmth of our small family, Sarah's laughter mingling with the crackle of the fireplace. Millfield, with its snow-dusted streets and close-knit heart, had embraced us fully, the whispers of my abandoned wedding fading into a quieter respect. Nurse Watson, Sarah's mom. Richard and I had spent months shaping the retreat center, our weekly meetings a blend of practical planning and tentative trust. The Miller-Watson Retreat Center, as we'd named it, his idea, to honor our partnership, was taking form on his grandfather's land, 100 acres of rolling fields and dense woods just outside town. We'd secured initial funding, navigated zoning hurdles, and won over skeptical council members, my reputation as a community servant smoothing the way. "You're making this real, Eleanor," Richard said one snowy afternoon, poring over blueprints at the community center. I smiled, tracing the outline of a therapy hall. "We're making it real. Together." Our relationship had evolved, not into the reckless love of youth but a steady camaraderie, rooted in shared purpose and mutual respect. We were careful, aware of Millfield's watchful eyes, but our dinners stretched longer, our walks along Hooper Creek lingered under starlit skies. Sarah, ever observant, teased gently. "You like him, don't you, Mom?" she said one evening, her algebra homework forgotten. I laughed, stirring cocoa on the stove. "I like what we're building, Sarah." "He's a friend." She raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Sure, Mom. But you hum when he's around." Her words, half joking, stirred a question I'd avoided. Could I let someone in, not just Richard, but anyone, after guarding my heart so long? At the hospital, my work remained a lifeline. The maternity ward was a whirlwind of life, babies born, families formed, losses mourned. I trained nurses with a calm born of experience, my hands steady even when my heart wasn't. The veterans ward, where I still volunteered, grounded me in a different way, their stories of survival echoing my own. "You give us hope," Nurse Watson, a young soldier said, his leg gone but his spirit fierce. I squeezed his hand. "You give me hope, too." James, my constant friend, watched my growth with quiet pride. "You're not just healing others, Eleanor," he said over coffee, his eyes warm. "You're healing yourself." I nodded, the truth settling deep. "I'm learning how." Millfield felt the world's pulse quickening, Vietnam's end in sight, Watergate's fallout shaking trust, economic strain tightening belts. The textile mill's closure loomed, leaving families anxious, and I doubled efforts at the free clinic, ensuring care for those slipping through cracks. The retreat center became a beacon of hope, its promise of healing for veterans and youth resonating with a town craving renewal. Richard's commitment, funding, vision, his willingness to stay, shifted public opinion. "He's not the boy who ran," Mrs. Willis said at a council meeting, her stern face softening. "He's trying to make it right." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He was. By spring, the retreat center's groundwork began, bulldozers carving paths through the land, the air thick with dust and possibility. Richard and I stood on a hill overlooking the site, the April breeze carrying the scent of turned earth. "This is it, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What we lost, what we built, it's all here." I touched the locket he'd given me, its engraving, "From endings come beginnings, a quiet truth." "It's not just about us," I said. "It's for them." I gestured to the town below, its rooftops peeking through budding trees. He nodded, understanding. Sarah, now a freshman, was my anchor through the chaos. Her youth group thrived, her art a vibrant outlet for her healing heart. One night, as we planted tulip bulbs in our garden, she asked, "What if you and Richard get close, like, really close?" I paused, dirt under my nails. "I don't know, Sarah. I'm not sure I'm built for that anymore." She looked at me, her eyes older than her years. "You're built for anything, Mom. You just have to let yourself try." Her faith in me, unyielding, cracked something open, a willingness to consider a future beyond the walls I'd built. In June, we announced the Retreat Center's opening gala, set for June 12, 1973, our would-be wedding anniversary. Richard's choice was deliberate, a chance to overwrite a painful memory with celebration. "Are you sure?" I asked when he proposed the date, my voice catching. He met my gaze, steady. "I want to honor what was and what is. If you're ready." I was, or close enough. The town rallied, volunteers painting signs, local businesses donating food. Sarah, now a poised teenager, took charge of youth outreach, her energy infectious. "This is gonna be big, Mom," she said, her smile bright. I hugged her, my heart full. The gala arrived, Millfield aglow under a perfect blue sky, the retreat center's grounds transformed with lanterns and wildflower arrangements. I wore a simple green dress, the locket at my throat, feeling not like a bride but a woman whole in her own right. Richard, in a tailored suit, stood beside me as we welcomed guests, townsfolk, hospital colleagues, even James, his grin unwavering. Sarah, radiant in blue, charmed donors with her warmth. The center itself was a vision, rustic cabins, a therapy hall, a garden budding with promise. As dusk fell, Richard took the stage, his voice carrying over the crowd. 15 years ago today, he began, I made a mistake born of fear, one that hurt someone I loved deeply. Murmurs rippled, but he pressed on. Eleanor Watson turned that pain into light, this center, her work, her daughter Sarah. Tonight, we celebrate her strength and this place of healing. He raised his glass. To Eleanor, and to new beginnings. Applause erupted, my cheeks warm with tears I didn't fight. Our eyes met across the crowd, and I saw not just regret but gratitude, for what we'd lost, and what we'd found. Later, as guests danced under string lights, James pulled me aside. "You did this, Eleanor. Not just the center, but you, your heart." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "We did it. All of us." Sarah joined us, her laughter bright, and I felt the past settle, not gone but part of a larger story. Richard approached, hesitant. "Thank you," he said simply. "For letting me be part of this." I nodded, the locket cool against my skin. "We're not done yet," I said, and meant it, for the center, for us, for whatever came next. The summer of 1973 faded into a crisp Millfield autumn, the Ohio hills ablaze with scarlet and gold, the air rich with the scent of fallen leaves and chimney smoke. At 30, I stood at the helm of a life I'd never imagined. Sarah, now 14, a vibrant force with dreams of teaching, my role as head nurse at Athens Memorial, a calling that anchored me, and the Miller Watson Retreat Center, its cabins and garden now welcoming its first guests, a testament to healing born from pain. My rental house, with its tulip-lined walkway and Sarah's artwork on every wall, was a sanctuary, its warmth a contrast to the cold June day 15 years ago when Richard left me at the altar. That wound, once raw, had become a scar, part of me, but no longer my definition. The Retreat Center's opening gala on June 12 had marked a turning point, replacing the memory of a broken wedding with a celebration of renewal. Richard's speech, his public acknowledgement of our past, had shifted something in Millfield's heart. The town, once quick to judge, now embraced him, not as the boy who'd run, but as a man seeking redemption. We worked side by side, our partnership a steady rhythm of planning sessions and community outreach. The center served Vietnam veterans grappling with unseen wounds and youth like Sarah had been, carrying losses too heavy for young shoulders. "It's working, Eleanor," Richard said one October afternoon, watching a group of teens plant a memorial garden. I nodded, the locket he'd given me, from endings come beginnings, warm against my collarbone. "It's more than I hoped." Our relationship deepened, not into the fiery love of our youth but a quieter bond, forged in shared purpose and hard-won trust. We were cautious, mindful of the past and Millfield's eyes, but our conversations stretched beyond the center, memories of starlit nights, dreams we'd buried, the people we'd become. Sarah, wise beyond her years, watched with a knowing smile. "He makes you laugh, Mom," she said one evening, her algebra book open. "That's a start." I ruffled her hair, dodging the question. Don't you have homework? But her words lingered, nudging open a door I'd long kept locked. Could I let someone in, Richard, or even James, who'd loved me quietly for years, without losing the strength I'd built? At the hospital, my work remained a lifeline. The maternity ward was a kaleidoscope of life, joyful births, heartrending losses, the raw pulse of humanity. I mentored nurses, my calm a beacon in chaos, and spent evenings on the veterans' ward, their resilience mirroring my own. You're a rock, Nurse Watson, a young amputee said, his smile defiant. I squeezed his hand. So are you. James, my steadfast friend, saw the change in me. You're not just surviving anymore, Eleanor, he said over coffee, his eyes warm. You're thriving. I smiled, stirring my cup. I'm learning what it means to be whole. Millfield, too, was healing. The textile mill's closure hit hard, but the retreat center brought hope, its programs drawing visitors and jobs. I expanded the free clinic, ensuring care for struggling families, my reputation opening doors. You're Millfield's heart, the mayor said at a council meeting, his gruff voice earnest. I shook my head. I'm just one piece. But I felt the truth of it, a pride rooted not in ego but in service. By winter 1974, the center was thriving, its cabins filled, its therapy hall echoing with stories of recovery. Richard bought a small house near the property, committing to Millfield for good. Our friendship edged toward something more, tentative but real. One snowy evening, as we reviewed budgets by my fireplace, he reached for my hand, his touch gentle. Eleanor, I don't expect anything, he said, his voice low. But I'm grateful for this, for you. I didn't pull away, the warmth of his hand stirring something I hadn't felt in years. I'm grateful, too, I said, meaning it. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was possibility. Sarah, now 15, graduated high school with honors, her sights set on college. I want to teach, Mom, she said, her college application spread across the table. Like you, I want to help people. I hugged her, tears pricking my eyes. You already do, sweetheart. Her youth group, now a county-wide program, was her legacy, a ripple of her healing heart. James, ever supportive, joined us for her graduation, his gift a leather-bound journal. For your next chapter, he said, winking. Later, he pulled me aside. You're happy, Eleanor. It looks good on you. I laughed, nudging him. So does your optimism. Christmas 1974 was a quiet affair. Sarah, Richard, James, and a few nurses gathered at my house, the dining room aglow with candles indoors. The table groaned with ham, mashed potatoes, and stories of the year's triumphs. Richard, now a fixture, carved the turkey, his ease a stark contrast to the stranger who'd returned 2 years ago. As we ate, Sarah raised her glass. To Mom, she said, her voice clear. For showing me what strength looks like. The room stilled, eyes on me. I blushed, lifting my own glass. To all of you, for making this life possible. Applause followed, my heart full. Now, at 82, looking back from my wooden house in Millfield, the same one my parents left me, I see a life shaped by pain but defined by what I built from it. The retreat center grew, serving generations, veterans, youth, families in crisis. Richard and I married in 1976, a quiet ceremony at the center, not a reclaiming of our youth but a new vow, tempered by experience. Our love, steady and mature, carried us until his death in 1998. Sarah became a teacher, her 3 children, my grandchildren, now the joy of my days. They know my story, the abandoned wedding, the center's rise, and they carry its lessons. Pain doesn't end you, it shapes you. Sitting on my porch, the hills rolling soft under a twilight sky, I think of the young girl in the satin gown, waiting for a groom who never came. She's still in me, but so is the woman who forgave, who built, who loved again. Life, I tell the young ones who visit the center, isn't about avoiding wounds. It's about what you do with them, how you turn scars into stars, how you make a heart broken once grow larger in the mending. That's the truth I've lived, And it's the wisdom I leave behind, here in Millfield, where the river flows and the hills stand eternal.